called to the service. And he was rushing to join a National Guard convoy leaving town. And of course his mother was filled with emotion. And the last thing this young physician heard her say to him as he went out the door is, "Bud, don't get constipated." See what I mean about emotions? We've done a smattering of the war in Europe. And we only have 2 more sessions to go, so it's time to turn our attention to the war in the Pacific and the China-Burma-India theater of operations. Our 2 participants tonight are both Navy veterans who have covered a lot of miles of water out there in the Pacific, and I think they have an interesting experience to tell us. The first one to participate tonight is a local man, Bob Jacks. Bob?
Good evening.
Good evening, Bob.
Well, we have heard visions from Europe, haven't we? Okay, I want to start out, see, what was I going to say now? I'm going to start out by saying that I want to say something about the European theater. I want to say something about Paul Zimmer, if I will. No offense or anything. Okay, just a minute. Paul has said in some of his speeches that that he would return back for visit in Europe and visiting Holland and so forth. And he said he noticed traveling through Europe that he saw Zimmer all around, you know, and he come back here and he said, you know, I didn't know I was so rich. Zimmer's all over the place. So I talked to a banker here, not too far away from here, and I said, I gave this story to this banker, and I said, is Paul all that rich? And he says, no, I know something about Paul Zimmer's net worth. He's not that rich. So this past summer I had a great nephew visiting our farm from New Mexico, and he's only 17 years old, but he's studying German. So I said, Mike, I says, in Germany, what does Zimmer mean? He says it means hotel, motel, restaurant, or have you. Sorry about that, Paul. Okay, I noticed, is Doris Schreiner in the audience tonight?
Not tonight.
No.
There's a SHAFE meeting in,
Pardon?
there's a SHAFE meeting in Chicago out of O'Hare, and she was
Okay.
attending that this weekend.
And then another thing I want to relate about the European theater. Doris didn't mention General Patton. About 2 months ago, I was out in New York visiting some friends, and they live not far from West Point. So I said, would you take me to West Point? I want to take a tour through West Point. And they said, well, we've never been there either. They've lived there all their life, and they only live 60 miles from that place. So we took a tour around the West Point, and a very interesting tour. And we got to the library, and there was this statue of General George Patton. It was in front of the library. Ordinarily, you put up a bust or a statue of some person looking out, right? Well, it so happens that General Patton flunked the first semester in West Point. And they asked him, why did you flunk that first semester, not the second semester of your first year? And he said, you know, I couldn't find the library. So what they did, they turned General Patton's bust around facing the library. So General Patton is facing the library. So you can see the library is very important to anybody and everybody. You found that out of St. Joe, didn't you? Okay, here we go. Oh yeah, I wanted to tell you, I'll tell you here later, I was in the Navy, joined the Navy for 6 years. And just to show you I was in the Navy, I'm going to tie a square knot for you. Somebody was laughing about something.
Do that one with your eyes closed too, can't you?
Yeah, I can do that with my eyes closed. So there you are, miss. The second knot I have is a figure 8. I can do that with my eyes tied too. This is Officer Bob Conley, or he follows me here tonight. There you go, miss. Now here's another knot that I like. Are there any ladies in here that are engaged to be married? Or going to be married, or let's say? Do you know anybody that's going to get married? Oh, is that right? Well, let's see. I see a little gal there. Here's a knot here I'm going to tie, miss. This is called a bowline knot. There's a knot that I gave to each one of my children at their wedding. I showed them this knot. I said, this knot will not come undone. It will not slip. So I want your marriage to be that way. So where's that nice looking gal? Right behind you there, Mrs. The gal right behind you. Well, I'm supposed to get on with this speech. I'm not to introduce the next speaker, but I'll tell you something about Bob Conley. He and I were in high school together, and he was about 2 years ahead of me. And the only time I really saw Bob Conley was when he was in a football uniform, or else he was going down through the aisles, assembly hall, and one thing or another, with an armload of books.
Don't tell any lies, please.
I'm not lying, that's the way I thought. I don't know how I'm getting along here, but I'm going. My name is Bob Jacks. I was born of Christian parents. I do not come from a military family. I graduated from Rensselaer High School in the year 1939. 1 year and 4 months later, being 19 years old, I volunteered to join the Navy. My date of enlistment was December 26, 1940, for a 6-year enlistment. I was discharged from the U.S. Navy with an honorable discharge December 22nd, 1946. I have some pictures and little articles that I'd like for my son Donnie to hand out to everybody that will keep you occupied. How's that? Being patriotic wasn't bothering me. Many young people felt as though they were encompassed by the nation. I was told that I would be joining the cleanest and best Navy in the world. I had never seen a warship before, and I had never seen either Pacific or Atlantic Oceans. I also chose the Navy because I wanted to see more of God's creation. And I thought that was a chance to see God's creation, you know, travel all over the world. I did all of this not really realizing how long 6-year enlistment would be. Not even realizing that maybe I would never see my parents, my sisters, nor my relatives again. I soon realized, because of World War II, that joining the service did create a hardship on my parents and family. When Phil Wood asked me to say a few words about my experience in World War II, I almost said a emphatic no. But Phil Wood's speech hasn't changed much since his high school days. Phil talks clearly and distinctively, and still talks slow. While Phil was still talking slowly, I changed my mind and told him that I would participate because I believe the dramatic history of World War II should be told. I remember talking to a World War I veteran after my service discharge, to a man by the name of Owen. I told Mr. Owen, I wish you fellows would have done a better job while the American forces were fighting in the European continent. His remark was, well, anybody could see that. So what is it, even today, that we aren't saying or seeing? Well, I don't mind standing up here before you folks, but I am saddened that I am to talk about war. So what is war? War is a cruel, heartless way to the peace treaty table. Yes, the warlords, or what have you, they go temporarily insane. It is a testing ground of some sort. Please note at this point in the Asiatic Pacific operation that Russia contributed nothing to the war efforts in the Pacific Asiatic War. It is a miracle that I stand here before you. I am not a journalist. I do not know if you are a journalist, a political science student, or a historian. I am to present to you a little history as a standard of value or determinant of events, or maybe a little research. I am not a spokesman for the U.S. Navy. When a person enlists into the service of his country, he is a little like the young lady who decides to become a nun. They know that they are giving up something. Some of you can recall that our President Franklin D. Roosevelt, back in that time, was always stating that, you guys heard it, I hate war. He says, I hate war. Remember that, buddy boy?
Yes, Eleanor hated war too.
That's right.
You just stole my next sentence here.
I upstaged you there, yeah.
You what?
I say I upstaged you there.
Yeah, okay. I have written here. Furthermore, FDR also stated that Eleanor hated war. Well, Franklin D. Roosevelt was appointed Secretary of the Navy in the year of 1913. Roosevelt was our 32nd president, dating 1933 to 1945. Roosevelt was going to keep us out of war. All we had to do was fear itself. You never hearing that? Okay. I do know that World War II was tragic. No one knows more about war than veterans of foreign wars. If we do not keep telling the story of all our wars, we rob people of their history and rob them of their future. Okay, before I go any farther, I'm indebted to Mrs. Lewis Ramp for this map. I think most of you know Mrs. Ramp. I took my boot camp training and fundamentals at Great Lakes, Illinois, a training camp which usually was 6 to 8 months indoctrination. We were there for 8 weeks and then assigned to various further schooling, ships, or Navy posts. I put on my request for sea duty and was assigned to the USS aircraft carrier Saratoga. After a week's leave to go home, carrying my orders on my person, I went aboard a troop train from Chicago to Seattle, Washington. We had to take a ferry from Seattle to Bremerton, Washington Navy shipyards. Upon arrival, there was a large aircraft carrier in that dry dock with the letters E on each side of the big smokestack. So the big carrier was in the process of having its big 16-inch guns removed and being replaced by numerous 5-inch anti-aircraft guns and 20-millimeter guns. Also various other updating and efficiency engineering. I went aboard the carrier the date about 14 March 1941. I first saluted the American flag, then saluted the officer of the day who was at the quarterdeck. I told the officer of the day, or deck, "Sir, I have orders to report to the aircraft carrier USS Saratoga. This aircraft is the only carrier in this dry dock." I also said, "Sir, does the letter E on the smokestack stand for the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise?" The officer of the day informed me that I was reporting to the right ship and that the big E's on the smokestack stood for the word efficiency. The officer of the day said there were several ships in an efficiency contest and that the Saratoga had won the big E for efficiency. I replied back to him, "Good." I also said I must be at the right place. I also said that I remember my ag teacher at Rensselaer High School always was putting the emphasis on efficiency. The officer said, "Sailor, you have come to the right ship, but there still is much work to be done." And that turned out to be a true statement. After about 2 months, the ship repairs had been completed. We left the Navy shipyard and steamed to Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was the home port for the USS Saratoga. I remember my dad and mom said to go to church services as often as you can. So I did go to the church services aboard ship on Sunday regularly. The first song I still remember to this day was "Eternal Father, strong to save for those in peril upon the sea." I had to study that hymn a little bit. What do they mean, for those in peril upon the sea? I have hardly been to sea yet. They're singing, "For those in peril upon the sea." What am I getting into? What am I getting into? For the next 3 months, we held war maneuvers. Then, boom, Pearl Harbor had been bombed by Japanese surprise attack. We were not berthed in Pearl Harbor on that day of the attack. We were en route to San Diego, and the Japanese fleet did not find us. I would like to add there that the USS Enterprise was 150 miles outside of Pearl Harbor during that sneak attack, and the Japs did not find them. The USS Enterprise had delivered a bunch of Navy and Marine fighter pilots to Wake Island. Incidentally, when I'm talking about the USS Enterprise, the U.S. Enterprise was the most decorated ship in the Navy. Okay, now that sneak attack was December the 7th. At Wake Island on December the 8th to the 23rd of 1941, a period of 11 days, American servicemen and civilians, outnumbered 3-1, held off a Japanese invasion in what President Franklin Roosevelt called the Great Fight. Wake Island is 2,300 miles west of Hawaii. The outcome, the capture of Wake Island battle was, it gave the Japanese complete control of the line of communication across the Central Pacific Ocean. But Wake's defense blunted Japanese momentum and raised home front American morale. All of the captured American civilians were taken as prisoners to China. All 98 Americans held on Wake Island for forced labor were later executed. Okay, now let me back up here to March 14th, 1941, the day I went aboard this aircraft carrier. President Roosevelt knew that the Japanese fleet was practicing war maneuvers someplace in the Pacific. Let me inform you that that date could have been a pre-Pearl Harbor. On March the 14th, Roosevelt ordered a Navy task force fully armed with guns and torpedoes in ready position. See here now. Roosevelt, okay, all those guns and torpedoes in ready position. Roosevelt said, go find that Japanese fleet. Fly the American flag on every ship of that task force, all 24 hours of the day and night, and to have the searchlight focused and pointing directly, lighting up the American flag. Also, Roosevelt said, do not fire on the Japanese fleet until fired upon. This American task force was under the command of Admiral Kimmel. Admiral Kimmel radioed back, we cannot find the Japanese fleet. What are our new orders? Roosevelt told Admiral Kimmel to take a world goodwill tour to Australia and back to Pearl Harbor. Admiral Kimmel was to take the blunt and was being held responsible for allowing the Japanese fleet of being so successful at Pearl Harbor, at the Pearl Harbor attack. There is a book to be published about Admiral Kimmel and about who was to blame for the Pearl Harbor attack. you may recall Admiral Kimmel was considered for court-martial investigation due to that Pearl Harbor attack. The next item of importance, 30 days after Pearl Harbor, while patrolling the Hawaiian Islands, this ship I was on, the USS Saratoga, 500 miles west of Pearl Harbor, took a torpedo hit from a Japanese sub. It was considered a lucky hit. Quite a bit of damage was done and killed 4 people below decks. We were being prepared in a Pearl Harbor dry dock until after the Battle of Midway. While in dry dock, hundreds of naval personnel were transferred to various ships in preparation for the Battle of Midway. I do not know to this day why it was that I was not transferred to another ship for this great naval war battle. I was 19 years old and one of the youngest men aboard the ship. The Battle of Midway was June of 1942. Well, I was getting the writer's cramp, so I quit writing. So I'm just gonna throw in a few little things here, I guess, as I think about it. I will say that you can walk through fire and not get burnt, but I don't advise anyone to do it. Okay, we went from the Battle of Midway, let's say, then I'll point to my map here. We started island hopping. That's the reason it's called island hopping. There's a lot of islands out there. There are 3 categories of islands out there. One of them is the Polynesia. Is that right? The other one is Micronesia. And the other one is Melanesia. All in this area here. Those islands in the main were under Japanese control. The reason it was called island hopping is because there's too many islands out there to take them one at a time. So our scouting planes and other intelligence would notice that maybe there's an airfield being built on this one particular island, so that's the one we went for. We did that all the way up to Guadalcanal, for instance. When we got out there towards Guadalcanal, the main purpose of the aircraft carrier was to be in the background. And our fighter planes and bombers would go ahead, along with battleships and other ships, would to bombard the islands so our Marines and soldiers could get on the island. And we were pretty successful at that, actually. we could get our Marines and the Army on to most any island without much trouble. But after they once got on there, they really caught the devil. Because the Japanese were hemmed in, they had caves, they had a lot of good airstrips out there. So at Guadalcanal, this task force I was in, we circled around the area. We circled around Guadalcanal with this task force. Guadalcanal's in this area or someplace. For 7 days before I heard it was 19,000 Marines went on that island. They got on, but they caught heck after they got on there. Before the Battle of Guadalcanal, there was a real bad battle between New Guinea and Australia, let's say. That was the Battle of Coral Sea, and that's where one of our Rensselaer boys lost his life at the Battle of Coral Sea. Our local BFW hall is named after James A. Moore, a Rensselaer boy who was in high school at the same time that I was. I would like to mention also that there was a boy from Rensselaer by the name of Preston Henry, who was in one of the squadrons that flew in and off our aircraft carrier. Press was a very likable fellow. He had many friends. He passed away a few years ago. Okay, let's see if I can say something here and I'll find something to say out here to say. I didn't see many Japanese. I doubt if I saw a dozen Japanese soldiers. The only time I'd see them is what maybe a ship would pick a pilot up out of the water. We didn't do that. The lighter ships did that. On this ship that I was on, almost forgot to tell you, I was an aviation ordnanceman. I helped arm the aircraft, machine guns, bombs, and torpedoes. I have slept on bombs as tall as this building. Out there in the war zone, you work on the double. Those officers, you on the double. I really got tired of doing things on the double. I'm telling you the truth, I got so tired out there that I have actually fallen asleep standing up. Maybe not very long, maybe 5 minutes, but I have fallen asleep standing up. Let's go back to Paul Zimmer. You remember Paul Zimmer said that he was so cold one night that he slept between two cows. They were bombed and they killed the cows. Well, Paul, that wasn't my idea of a mainland dream. Besides, I talked to several boys out there on those islands and one thing and another. They said, you know, I'd give my left ear for a cold glass of milk. Paul thinks I'm trying to pin him down. Okay, were there any blacks aboard? I remember Jim Lewis talking about the blacks. Yes, there were blacks aboard. But they were mostly officers, cook, mess cooks, and so forth. I thought it was strange. Every time I bumped into a black man, what state are you from? What do you want to know that for? After I told him I was from Indiana, I could strike up a conference with most any of those black guys. Got along pretty good. About a year or so after I got home from the service, I was walking down here with the State Bank, and I met a tall lady. Her skin was very white. She was beautiful, and she reminded me of the Polynesian people out there that I saw in one of those islands. And I thought, by golly, is this gal a Polynesian? I looked at that lady, still walking, and I come to the curb, and I missed the curb, still looking at this lady, fell flat on my face. This lady turned around. She said, are you all right? Are you hurt? I said, no, miss. I'm not drunk. I just never could get rid of my sea legs. So this lady went that way and I went that way. You know, that lady is in the crowd tonight. They've been very faithful attending these series. I noticed this lady's husband isn't here, but this lady has a son named John who is a full lieutenant in the U.S. Navy. Mrs. Ayler, would you stand up, please? There's that beautiful lady. I don't know if she remembers that date or not. That's a true story. Like I say, I'm just reminiscing right now. You see what's going on in the world today, talking about one world order. I don't want to comment on one world order because it's been tried before. I don't know if one world order would work because there's too much diversity. I just know that the United States should not give up its sovereignty. Okay, what were the Japanese trying to do out there? In my opinion, they intended to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and then overrun Thailand, Malaya, I guess that is, the Philippines and the Netherlands Indies. It would then complete its conquest with the Chinese. The Chinese held a lot of German soldiers at bay while all this war was going on. They were going to, in my opinion, unite all East Asia under Japanese dominion, and the great East Asia would prosper. Japanese, I think, expected that the two-ocean war would exhaust the Allies and make them willing to let Japanese keep the territories they had seized. That's my opinion. I'm about through here. Anybody have any questions they want to ask me?
I do. Could you comment on how many planes were on your carrier, and were they fighter planes or bombers or torpedo bombers?
There was,
Tell us a little bit about the casualties of the pilots on the aircraft carrier. Did the pilots on that carrier have high casualties?
high casualties.
Yes.
There were about 60 or 80 planes on that aircraft carrier. They were fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes. There were casualties, yes, Ray, but not too many on our ship. There were other carriers that caught heck out there. I remember one time a Japanese fleet flew over to Sarah and went to get that new modern, or not new, but the more modern aircraft carrier, the Enterprise that I was talking about. I remember that incident. I haven't said much about those islands. Those island people out there were mixed people, mixed race, let's say. The Polynesians were the whitest, and the next one, what's that name there? Next Polynesian, what's the name? Micronesian. They were a little darker, and when you got over to the Melanesia, they were even darker. That's the type of people they were. The lady that gave me this map was Mrs. Lewis Ramp, and she had a son. First, let me back up a minute. The Micronesian island was under the UN and U.S. government after the war, and Mrs. Ramp's son is a lawyer, and he was the prosecuting attorney out there in the Micronesian territory at one time. But he is over there now, but all three of those territories I spoke about are now independent. Mrs. Ramp goes out to see her son every year. There's a line here drawn someplace that Louis Ramp drew from United States, go over to right here, I guess. That's where that Micronesia, say it again. Micronesia island territory is. But Mrs. Ramp goes out there every year. She has for the last 20 years. Is there anything else you want me to say, or know about?
Were the people on those islands friendly to the Japs, or were they friendly to the United States, or neither?
They were a little skeptical of everybody, I'll put it that way. I don't think they had any love for the Japs, I'll put it that way. Well, let's see here. Go ahead.
You spoke about on your ship the blacks and the jobs that they had, and it was, I assume, just in the kitchen. In 1946, there was like a civil rights commission that looked into discrimination, and in the report, it came out that there were some experiments done in the armed forces that had blacks serving in situations to prove that to the southern states of the United States that we can integrate our races. My question is, what were other capacities in which the African Americans served in the armed forces besides in the kitchen area? And do you know, or does anyone here know of some of those experiments that were done where the African American was mixed in with the whites serving in the different divisions of the war?
There was probably more of that over in the European theater. What do you say about that, Bob?
I think your statement's correct.
Pardon?
I say I think your statement's correct. They were mostly,
Were there blacks fighting side by side in the islands over there?
well, we had one whole company aboard one time. They were all black. Very nice.
So,
How did you feel about that? Did you feel that that wasn't fair, that there were more of the white Americans in the actual combat zone? Or did you feel safer because perhaps you felt that they were not as experienced or maybe not as capable or did not understand what our cause was for being in the war? Did you have any impression at the time?
Well, my personal impression was, it made no difference to me. I mean, they were doing their job, and as long as they had to be, go through rigorous training that the Army gave them. I mean, as I said, I had a whole black company aboard, so from the officers on down.
well, in my position, I was wondering, where are the blacks? I mean, that kind of went through my mind just a little bit. I think things are a little different today.
We had black fighter pilots.
Yes, that's what I.
We had a lot of, at first we had them in P-39s. It was an obsolete plane, slow. And then later on we got them in P-38s and P-51s and 47s. And I was escorted more than once with black pilots. They were very good. No better than anybody else, but they were just as good. They was out there to do their jobs and save their plane and our necks too. So, and they did their job. If I wouldn't have knew it, I wouldn't have seen any difference in the combat role that each one played if I wouldn't have just happened to know that they was a black squadron up there with us that day.
Okay, I'm holding this pointer up. I'm talking about casualties now. Let's say this is Germany, European, and this is Japan, Pacific. Do you think the casualties were more over here in the European, or were they more in the Asiatic Pacific?
Pacific.
What are you saying?
Pacific.
Pardon?
Somebody said Pacific.
Huh?
She was saying Pacific.
Oh, she? Okay. From all I read, the casualties on both sides were like this. It was about even, from all I've read. I know there's probably had something else to say, but that seems to be about it right now. Okay?
Okay, we'll take a 5 to 10 minute break. Thank you, Bob.
Take part in this topics tonight. He's a resident of Lafayette, and he and his wife have come up to participate, of course. And Bob Conley lived here in Rensselaer. How many years, Bob?
Most of my life.
Most of his life. And then he wound up in Lafayette. So for those of you that don't know Bob, he's our man. I think a lot of you know him. Bob Conley.
Thanks, Phil. And you asked how long did I live in Lafayette? Well, I mean in Rensselaer. You can see I get a little bit confused. I graduated from Old St. Augustine grade school in 33, and then RHS in 37, and St. Joe in 41. So my formative years were spent here. And after the war years, why I settled in Chicago, and I met a little girl by the name of Kathleen O'Grady, and she became a Rensselaerian. In fact, all 5 children were born here in Rensselaer. We won't go into my family or anything like that. My time was spent in the South Pacific, primarily. I was aboard an LST. It was called LST 660, and the picture of the 660 is floating around. I hope that it doesn't get away from me, because it is. Oh, thank you. Just so I know where it is. This is there. That was my home for 2 years. We picked it up, and it was built by the American Bridge Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we picked it up and brought it down the Ohio River and Mississippi, and then out into the South Pacific after going through the canal. Our ship participated in what we call 5 D-Days. That was the D-Day was the day that you went in for your invasion. And we had a lot of interesting experience firsthand. I don't drive any Japanese cars because that's where my time was, especially a Mitsubishi. I had my life flash in front of me in about that long because I had charge of the after guns on the ship, and this Jap Zero was coming in, and I could see that our boys were riding into the center of that thing, and he should have gone down, I thought, but of course didn't know at that time what a kamikaze was. It was the honor to die for the country, and he had locked himself in there and kept that ship coming. And the only reason that we were able to survive was one of the gunner's mates just took the pointer, that was the guy on the twin 40s, and he cut the wing off. But it was so close by that time when he hit the deck, or as we say, the water, parts of the plane came up on our stern. That's how close we were. We had quite an experience. We had a good crew. Of course, primarily, the captain's name was John M. Harrigan, and he was a good Irishman. He came from Indianapolis. He was an attorney, a real fine gentleman, and had a pharmacist mate in my division that had been in the Marine Corps, came out as a corpsman. So when he came back in the Navy, they made him a first-class corpsman, and when I got him, it called for a chief. I said, "Doc, you just become a chief. I got your buttons for you." So I had real good help. Didn't have to worry too much. The 5 D-Day operations that we had started out, our first big invasion was in the Hollandia, New Guinea, in that area. And then later on, we operated out of it. Started then in Guadalcanal, and we kept moving up through the islands. So we, as I said, saw a tremendous amount of action. As I said, learned firsthand what kamikazes were. And actually, our first invasion was Peleliu. And I don't know how many of you in here that are veterans get the Veterans magazine. As I said, a member of the VFW. And this was an article that was in the September issue, I believe, yes. September issue of the bloody battle of Peleliu. I had an opportunity to read it. It was a bloody battle, I can assure you. That was our initiation into it. And then from Peleliu, we went up into the Philippines. We were in the initial invasion of the Philippines, and we went every one of the Philippine landings, and then Okinawa and Ayashima. In fact, I was on the beach at Ayashima watching the proceedings with my field glasses. And all of a sudden, this little buzz went by my ear, and it was a Jap 25. Right next to us was the LST that had Ernie Pyle. And Ernie, as you know, didn't make it. I think he got Ernie, and I was lucky. I got off. So the the Navy, of course, I liked it because of the closeness and the spirited corps that you got in the Navy. It's when you live, eat, and sleep with people 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, you get to know them. As I said, the skipper, being John M. Harrigan, he was a congenial person. And then I ended up with Doc Reddish. Sidelight on that one was Doc Reddish was from around the Crawfordsville area. And down in Lafayette after the war, or when we first moved down there, I'm playing golf one day, and the gentleman I was playing with, he was telling me he was a dentist out in the South Pacific. And I said, oh, I spent some time out there. I was on the LST. And he said, well, you know, my brother-in-law was on the LST. And I said, well, what was the number of that LST? And he told me 660. He said, oh, my God. I said, that's old Doc. I would have been lost without him because Doc was 38. He was almost like my daddy because he'd been in the peacetime Marine Corps. And as I said, he was mustered out as a second-class corpsman, and I got him, and I made him first class and chief. So it is kind of a small world. As I said in the VFW magazine, the Bloody Battle of Peleliu, it was a bloody battle. Actually, the outfit that we had aboard was a Army 105 howitzer outfit that had their howitzers in Army ducks. And I don't know how many people have seen these Army ducks, where they just go off the bow of the ship and on in because the ships couldn't get close enough to the shore, so they had to use those to get on into the land. And a gentleman by the name of Mr. Moore, Dick Moore, was the senior officer in this Army unit that was aboard his company. And I got to know Dick real well. He used to like to come up, especially along the 12 to 4 watch, and anybody who was in the Navy knew how that's one of the toughest watches there is, especially to stay awake. And Dick used to come up and visit with me because we didn't have a lot to do, just keep the Navy from hitting the ship in front of you and the ship aside of you. But shortly after we were down in Lafayette, I was in this restaurant. I said, Kay and I were having dinner, and I said to Kay, I said, there's a gentleman I think was on my ship. And of course, I'm a bashful guy. I went over and introduced myself and told him, and he was amazed that we'd run into each other. So that shows you how small the world is. But from Peleliu, we went on into every island in the Philippine group we hit. And these were all initial invasions. And as I said, then we were up at Okinawa, and from Okinawa, Aishima, and that's, as I said, where Ernie Pyle got killed. And then on into Japan. We were in the occupational troops. I never will forget the couple of boys that I was with when we went in at Liberty. And this Japanese gentleman was coming down, and I was trying to make all kinds of, asking him questions, and he spoke more fluent English than I did. And come to find out that he was educated at the University of California out in San Diego, or not San Diego, in San Francisco area. And it's, as I said, it was so amazing to me that, as I said, his English being so fluent. And here I was butchering the old English language, and still I'm butchering it, and I don't think Margaret Meyer would be too happy with me as one of her. And Maggie was a great gal, though. She put up with a lot. And to be some of the things that, as I said, I passed that LST aboard, and there was her picture around, and there was a lot to for an invasion. I mean, we had to go through all kinds of various drills with the unit that we had. We had to go into these islands and drop the bow door down, and these guys had to unload and participate. So we got to know them pretty well. The Army boys who were aboard. The only thing they didn't like, they said, about the ship, especially LSTs, because when you're in a heavy sea and you hit these waves, you could see that steel, it had a lot of flexibility in it, and they didn't like the way that thing snaked itself. And especially, as I said, we went through that typhoon off Okinawa, and that's about the only time I ever got sick. For 5 days, we couldn't go fast enough because with a heavy wind behind us and a strong sea, we could probably make 10 knots. And you can appreciate how fast 10 knots is, and you get stuck in a storm area, you can't break out of it. I mean, you're any way you go, because you always have to keep heading into those waves if you ever got caught in one of these side washes. And in fact, that particular storm was so rough that we lost it. A heavy cruiser, because it got caught in one of those swells and over she went. So it's not the easiest thing to keep your ship going into the sea all the time either, because you've got to be sure that you are maneuvering that baby and don't get caught in one of those swells. I don't know, did I pass the ship's log out? People had a chance to look it over, because as you can see, we were pretty busy. If you got 5 D-days, you're on the run all the time. And we operated primarily out of Hollandia, New Guinea, after we secured that island. And we were always going back to get the troops, and my job and responsibility at that time was to get the food aboard for the next trip. Ice cream was one of the favorite things. You didn't have too many opportunities to get ice cream out there. And so you learned to barter. Since we had an extra small boat, I'd get aboard the supply ship, and I'd get a hold of the supply officer, and I'd say, "Now, sir," I said, "you like to go over to the club, don't you? You don't like to ride down that great big old LCM when there were all the crew members and everything. How would you like to have a small boat at your convenience?" Because I always bargained with the captain that I'd have an extra small boat to barter with. Well, that was a good idea. And I said, "Well, sir, here's what we need. And I know that this hasn't been approved, this hasn't been approved, but if you just go ahead and let me have my men get down there and take the supplies," I said, "I'll just see that you get that small boat." So naturally, I tell the boys, "This is what's approved and what you can steal." I mean, midnight requisition. So we ate well on the ship. We had ice cream. A lot of other ships didn't have ice cream, and we had fresh vegetables.
You didn't give me any, Bob, when I was on that.
You weren't on mine, buddy, or you would have had it. Okay. The experiences that I had were, well, now all you can think of is the pleasant things that happened. And I really can't say that it was a lot of heartaches and so forth, because you were away from home. And it seemed like we'd never get done, because we get back from one invasion and bingo, we're loading up for another one. And having, as I said, 5 D-days, there's a lot of them. As far as anything that I can tell you was, this gentleman over here, I'm looking over there and I see that U.S. Navy LST, and I see the 459. He could probably tell you more than, I don't know, were you out in the South Pacific with that?
Sir,
Okay.
Southwest.
Okay. Well, I don't recall ever being in the same convoy with 660 and 459, but you probably are on some of the invasions. As I said, we started out and we made all the Philippine invasions, and original occupational troops into Japan, we made that. So I think the best thing for me to do is ask you what you would ask me questions, and I hope I can answer them for you.
Bob, I've often wondered on LST. I was in on the invasion of Okinawa, and we hit that beach. We hit it hard. It was sand. Some of it's coral. You got to know where you're going.
Right.
And I never saw them get that LST backed off of that beach. How do they do? They winch that off with another ship?
No.
Or-
What you had in the
Or
stern
does
part of the ship.
cargo let it be buoyant? and let
Well,
it
I'll give you
come up?
I'll give you an idea. Our ship, when it was loaded, we drew only about 6 feet forward and about 12 feet aft. So you know we're just sitting So once you unloaded, your ship would rise, and then we had our ballast tanks to keep us loaded down, because we filled those with water to hit the beach. So when you're getting ready to come off, you pumped all that water out to lighten your ship lower. And then we had a stern anchor. So when we went in to hit the beach, you dropped the stern anchor quite a bit, for maybe 300 or 400 yards you had in that stern anchor. So you kind of winched yourself off of the beach, you kept pulling. Then we had small boats that would also get up in the bow part and push back to keep you off. But it was quite an interesting ship, and the reason that the LSTs were developed like they were, as you know, a lot of them were built down in Jeffersonville. However, ours was built in Pittsburgh by the bridge company, was because it was a flat bottom boat, and that was the reason they developed it. The only way they knew how to do their island hopping. You didn't have any docks to go in and unload at. When you hit that beach, you drove your equipment off, and backed off, and went after some more. As you can pretty well see on that one picture that I have there, it shows you how they actually looked.
Bob, what was the average water depth when you hit the beach?
Well, a lot of them were maybe just 2 or 3 feet was all. So because it was just like going up here to Lake Michigan, and you know how the depth of the water is. You wade out, you can just keep getting deeper and deeper. It was about the same kind of a beach. So
What kind of power did you have?
we had 2 Fairbanks Morris. The motive power was, the size that you have in your diesel engine in your train. We had 2 of those down in the engine room. And we had 2 Wisconsin diesels in the back to handle the propellers. So that was the motive power.
Did you ever get kicked off the beach?
You mean by the
By the Japs?
Japs coming after us? No, as I said, we were always pretty lucky. I don't ever recall being attacked while we were on the beach. I know one time that we were awful lucky. As I said, the captain was returning, and he got our signals mixed up and going into one of the beaches. I can't think which one it was, but we were in the wrong slot. And the beachmaster waved us off. And we backed off. Here comes a kamikaze, and he went in that spot that we would have been in had the skipper hit the right beat, had it right marking. That's how close, that's about one of the closest calls that you can say I had. But no, they had a lot of power. I mean, those big winches we could winch our way off pretty much. And with the small boat helping.
Maybe there's some people would like to know what LST really stood for.
Well, of course, my definition is a long, slow target, but landing ship tank. And it was developed, as I said, primarily for the Pacific Theater, because you had no docks or anything. And that's the only way that you could get your equipment onto the various beaches that you hit. Is there any more questions here?
Did you say nobody was shooting at you? Shooting at your LST?
Oh yeah, we had
They were shooting at you?
Yeah. The first time that we ever saw them that any consequences was when we went into latex.
But had all these islands been pre-bombed and pre-softened up?
Well, yeah, we would actually, going in on invasions, we would kind of be back, and the battle wagons and the cruisers were bombing the area that we were going into with their 16-inch guns and so forth. And when they got to what they thought was everything was pretty clear, then we went in. But I would sit up there on that conning tower sometimes and feel like I could almost reach up and get one of those big, heavy 16-inch shells going across as they were going down. And I said, boy, I hope those gunners don't lower that thing too much, because they were landing sometimes maybe 200 or 300 yards in front of us. And it would, but the boys were good marksmen. Yes.
What kind of facility did you have on this? I mean, was there bunks or places to...
Yes, actually the cruise quarters were in the after part of the ship, and the passageways that went down was what most of the Army boys slept in. The 3 bunks high, and in one of these compartments would be you could have 9 fellows sleeping because you had your 3 and 3 in the area. And
What was the crew on this ship? How many-
we had 9 officers and 110 men was the crew. So,
Would you take in primary infantrymen?
Pardon me?
You take infantrymen in?
anything we're going, I mean, like the first invasion we had these Army ducks, you've seen probably pictures of them, and 105 howitzers inside the ducks. And we had a whole company aboard. So that's quite a few, you know, what a size of a company is. And I don't know whether that may be repetitive here, but one of the friends I've met in Lafayette was aboard the ship, Dick Moore. And he was the commanding officer of this one unit. He was shared my bunk because I had a stateroom that was always had that extra bunk, and I usually got one of the officers was in my stateroom, and across they had 4 of them together in double bunks. Somebody else have a question?
Yes. On the average, how long were the Army or the Marines on your ship before they landed?
Well, it depended upon where the invasion was and where our
On the
board.
average. On the average.
I would say sometimes 2 to 3 weeks. I think the first group we had was aboard, well, Dick Moore can tell you, he said we were aboard 54 days. I didn't realize that he was aboard that long, but that was...
And about how long were these ships, these landing crafts? About how long were they?
Our ship?
Yes.
Oh, we were 360 feet long from stem to stern, and we had a 65-foot beam. We could carry on our tank deck, we could carry 2 6x6 trucks and have them, you know, bolted down on the, so they wouldn't bounce around or anything. And you could have a passageway in between them. And as I said, the 6 small boats, because used those to get personnel ashore.
Bob, would it be all right if I pass this around?
Oh yeah, I thought it was being passed around.
This is Bob's landing craft.
Landing ship tank.
Okay, 360 feet long. I think if you take a look at this, you'll realize it was quite a responsibility for a 25-year-old man to...
Excuse me, Phil, you maybe put it in front of the video camera just for a moment there.
All right.
Let Bob do that. So,
Okay.
Would you hold that up in front? And Bill, you think you
Oh.
could make sure we're getting a good...
Can you get a, you want it up closer or back off or how?
No, I think we got a good shot of it there.
Good. Is that okay? You want to pass that?
Would somebody make
It's been around?
Gets it back?
Good. I don't want to lose it. As you can see, close to my heart, after spending 2 years of my life on it. Any more questions? I just...
Was there somebody sitting up there with a machine gun or anything that, if there was anybody shooting at you, was there somebody to fire back?
Oh, yes. I don't know if you noticed here, on this ship, we had twin 40s up here in the bow.
Now, is that a machine gun?
Yeah, twin 40, you know, not a machine gun, actually. ACAC type. You got a 20 millimeter shell, and they're going boom, 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 boom. Okay.
Pom-pom, they call it sometimes.
Okay. And then on the side, we had 20 millimeters in case they did get through that close to you. As I said, this is when I was standing, I had charge of these. We had, in the stern part here, we had 2 tubs or 2 20 millimeters. One was here and then the other one was up here. And that's when this little boy moved his gun over and cut the wing off, where this guy, the kamikaze, would have gotten it. And that's when I said you could see your life kind of passing from it. Because all I could visualize was the Western Union man delivering to the folks that they'd lost their son.
Now, you were saying you had it with 2 6x6s side by side up on the top deck. How'd you get those down to the lower deck so you could unload them?
Oh, we had an elevator that went up. You lowered the elevator, lifted them up and down. And then when they're coming off, you could drop your ramp, and it's like just going down from the 2nd floor up here. You had a long ramp that went on and hit the beach. In fact, as I said, I think you can see on his LST, if you look, we couldn't get in any closer. A lot of times we had, the last thing we always loaded was a big cap with a blade in front. So when we hit the beach, that guy went off, and if he didn't have enough space, vehicles go off, he'd go back and he'd build a runway out to your ship, or to the bow doors.
You also plowed up a lot of landmines, anti-tank mines, the Japs might have left.
Well, fortunately, I don't think they realized at the time what LSTs were, and they really didn't pile up the beaches. Really, we were lucky because they didn't. And they only really started after us was in Okinawa. Then they realized what LSTs were doing to them. So we were pretty lucky in getting through as much as we did.
How much equipment could you haul on one of those things? Say-
Well, you know, I don't know if you know what an engineering company is. They got all kinds of equipment and a whole company of men. That's quite a bit. Joe, I really can't tell you.
How about tanks? How many tanks could you hold?
Well, we never really had what you call the Army tanks that are visualizing. We had the tanks that were kind of Amtrak that could go up to the beach. Yeah, and but Joe, to give you an answer, it's difficult. If you can visualize a company and all the equipment the company would need to be mobile, that's what we could haul. And that's what, as I said, that's why an LST was designed, I think, was to serve the South Pacific, because they had no way to unload anything. I think this gentleman here would substantiate that.
How many decks?
Pardon me?
How many decks?
Well, you only actually had the tank deck and your topside. So, there was really only one deck on each side of your passageway and the back part or the stern of the ship where the crew lived. So you'd have to say 2 decks was all we had, really. Is that correct? Or did you live aboard it?
Decks, yeah, but there's plenty of stories.
Oh, yes, yes.
6 or 7.
Right.
7 stories high.
Right.
How much, or could you comment about the information that you received about the strategies of the war movement and maybe what you might surmise would be the next location and then what might turn
Well,
out to
we
be?
always got aboard the ship before we went on an invasion, what the plans were, and then they held briefings for the officers, and then we went back to the ship and went over the instructions and what we were supposed to be, where we were in the convoy, and that type of stuff. So.
Was there a radio band that like the other sea?
Oh yes, we had communications all the time
listen to
from the flagship, as we call it, and you got your instructions. At 0600, you're going to change course from 300 to 325, that type of instructions. You know, you were in constant voice communication with your lead ship.
Yeah. Was there ever any certain person that conceived the design of the LST, or?
That's a question I couldn't answer. All I can tell you that some of the people in Butte ships in Butte were probably appraised of what it was going to be like out in the South Pacific, and they knew that they couldn't handle the Army personnel in the same manner that they would in the European theater. And that's LST was.
I've heard that the British had a lot of work, did a lot of work on.
Yes, I remember that because of their that invasion that they had from crossing the channel, and that's why they were so successful. Was they was able to come in a mass force with all these LSTs. Yes, so they did have a lot to do, and we took that knowledge and put it to work. Any more?
You had small assault craft with you.
Yeah, LCVPs we call them.
How many would you have?
Well, ours was what we call an attack craft. We had 6 of them aboard.
6 of them.
The normal LST was just 2 for being able to get to shore to get your supplies and so forth.
But on the assault on an invasion landing,
Yeah.
you had 6, and how about from, with your troops on, you didn't, you had those stored on that part of your LST? Or they were?
The troops?
No, the small landing craft.
Oh, you can see the what we call the boat davits. They were hanging out here.
But-
Yeah, and we just dropped them down off there, and they were out in the ocean.
And they had the ones I had the front,
They
ramp.
dropped the ramp down, yeah,
Yeah.
when you hit the beach.
Never get sick in all my life, even that diesel fume. Some
Well-
of those things out there.
Yes, I always felt sorry for the poor Army boys when they came aboard, because especially they said, you know, you can't dig any holes out there when those steel decks, you just can't do it. The roughest, and the only time I really got sick was, as I said, on that typhoon afterwards in Okinawa. And I was telling Kay, when I was hearing about how that typhoon was doing down in Florida, and getting into 145-mile winds, I said, that's pretty strong, because the highest that we ever had recorded was 150-mile-an-hour winds. And that was that big storm we had at Okinawa. We were caught at sea, and we couldn't, all we could do was hopefully that you can just keep heading into the sea so you wouldn't get caught in one of those swells.
You didn't stay on the beach very long then?
No, we would hit the beach, and as quick as we get unloaded, why, boom, we were off the beach, because there was somebody else had to get in that slot. And then you'd circle and wait till you got back together, and then you went back to your loading area, wherever that was.
You always travel in convoys, Bob?
Yes. Yeah. Very seldom we were ever, in fact, I don't ever remember us being alone, or even when we came back after the war was over to Pearl Harbor. I mean, there was a convoy. So.
Fueling, could you fuel it?
We had, as I said, these ballast tanks on the side where we had water, but we could also carry fuel on them. And a lot of times when we would go out and to be gone a long time, you had nothing but fuel on the babies. In fact, we were able to fuel the smaller craft, such as subchasers, for instance, or LCIs, that would come alongside us to be fueled. So I don't know how much capacity it was. I know we had a tremendous.
You didn't have to fill up very often.
No, you didn't. In fact, it took pretty much of a tanker to fill us up when we were completely empty. That's a tanker meaning the fuel ship.
Bob, some of these people probably wondered in a rough sea how you got that line across. That's pretty interesting too.
Well, of course, the line, if you needed them, was shot across.
Shot with a shotgun.
Yeah, and
then a bigger line.
But very, very seldom when you're in a rough sea did you ever transfer any personnel. It was usually
Not personnel, fuel.
Oh, fuel?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, naturally, then you just used your shotgun to get it across, and they'd hook it up. I mean, that was it. And then you kept pulling it in with your one small line.
Yeah, you use a small line, and then, then a bigger one, and then,
Right. Then
the
you
fuel
finally get
line
the fuel line.
comes
Yeah.
across. It's
Right.
pretty interesting.
Right. Any more questions?
How many ships would go in on one of these invasions at one time?
Well, again, it depended on the size of the invasion and how big the beach was. I mean, there were several beaches that we had. In fact, this picture here, as I was passing around, there was probably, that beach was a big one, I recall, and there was probably 25 or 30 of us lined up alongside.
Which one was that, Bob?
This was in San Narciso, going into.
Acquainted with that.
Yeah, that was Manila. San Narciso was, as you went into Manila, this was the area that you had to go through before you got into Manila Bay. You want to pass that on around, people didn't see it. Any more questions?
Bob, you said you were a graduate of St. Joe College at the time you went in the Navy. How much training did they give you, did the Navy give you before they put you on this outfit?
I might have been misleading. I was fortunate, I graduated from St. Joe in 41. And I had signed up when the draft came out in 39, if you'll recall, I signed up. And because I'd signed up in 39, I was able, one thing that the draft board didn't do, they didn't call me up until actually I had my college education completed. And then I didn't get called up until the spring of
Yeah,
42.
but how much training did the Navy give you? 6 months or 3 months, or you had to know more than you learned at St. Joe to run that ship?
Oh, yes.
You understand my point?
Yeah, now I got your question, but I learned, well, as I said, I was enlisted, then I was a chief and drill, like a drill sergeant. But then I went to school and had to take navigation and all that other. In fact, navigation was one of the toughest. I had a difficult time with that day, but almost flunked out on that one alone. But you had to be able to choose the sun and the stars and plot it to find out where you were or where you're going and see if you're going the right road.
Was that over a 6-month period?
Well, I was in Officers Candidate School I was there, I was only there 3 months. They got you up early in the morning. In fact, if you dropped your pencil to reach down and pick it up, you missed a chapter.
Bob, all the training and all the services was very accelerated at that time.
Oh, yes, yes.
They really poured it on you to grasp it, and I think all the people involved realized they better learn it and pay attention.
Oh, there was no, you didn't have to worry about any goofing off. Everybody was really intent on getting their...
it was very accelerated.
As I said, if you dropped your pencil on the floor, you might miss a half a page, or I mean a half chapter that the guy covered while you were reaching down to pick it up. Any other questions here?
You never told us about that sweet voice telephone operator in Chicago, how it ended up.
Well, that has nothing to do with the LST 660. You're getting after the fact when I went up to.
Well, you gotta finish it now.
Well, of course, naturally, my home being Rensselaer, I decided that there had to be other places to go after I came out of the service. I went up to Chicago. And ended up meeting a very lovely lady by the name of Kathleen O'Brady. And the way I met her, of course, was over the telephone. That's the only romance. He's putting me on the spot, and I'm making Kathleen embarrassed here, but they asked for it. And I talked to her for about 2 weeks, and kept asking her to go to lunch with me. But I said, I'm just a country boy from a little town in Rensselaer. And I think that's what shocked her, because I was just a country boy. I mean, she was afraid of me. But anyway, I was lucky to get her. We had lunch, and one thing that led to another, and now she's grandmother. I think we have about 11 grandchildren. So had 5 children. We got a good start in getting the grandchildren. But Kathleen Teresa O'Grady was just a country boy going up to the big city of Chicago. Now we got the personal matters taken care of. Any other questions as far? I know I'll get shot for them, but I was asked, and I didn't put I didn't set anybody up on that one. They came after me.
Did you ever pick up any soldiers or anything off of the islands? You only delivered them, or did you?
Well, the only time we'd pick them up, of course, was we were going in after an island secure. We'd bring them back, and then they'd go to their operating base and regroup, and then they'd go out for another island, because around Hollandia, New Guinea, was an operating base. I don't know what the New Guinea area was Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and all that stuff was together. Very seldom we ever seen the groups that we hit an island with. Very seldom we ever saw them again, because we just had to go back and pick up everything.
Who got rid of the casualties off the island?
Joe, I have no idea. No idea. I know the hospital ships were always riding the anchors out there, and they'd get the injured that were able to be patched up and so forth back to the hospital ships.
They, in answer to his question, Bob, they flew quite a few off.
Oh.
Back to Bougainville, or to Guadalcanal. They had a base hospital that was pretty well built then, and C-47s would come in and pick them up.
Yeah, I know when we went into the Leyte the second time, there was a airstrip called Dulag Airstrip, and those C-47s would come in there with like a hospital ship.
Right.
And they had the nurses aboard and everything, and they'd fly them to, as you said, a lot of them sometimes.
The nearest hospital,
big,
according to what their needs were.
Right. It was pretty well organized, I would say, yes.
You talked about Ernie Pyle not making it. I've been to his grave.
Oh, yes, I have, we were there, we hit that beach afterwards when, as I said, we hauled supplies, and I have a picture in my collection of pictures of Ernie Pyle's grave, yes. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Were the kamikaze pilots active all during the war? Because we only heard about them towards the end of the war.
No, down in the Guadalcanal area, and when we were down in that, operating out of there, we never, I mean, they were shot out, of course, but the first time we ever had any experience, and it was, you know, kind of like a shock, was Leyte, when we went into Leyte.
What year was that?
Let's see, wasn't that in 44 or something?
Ask me, I was up south in grade school.
They were actually 44.
Yeah, that was all in 44.
Lately, they were,
Yeah.
they hit my sister ship, but the time
I never, I know the first time I saw him, I just couldn't believe what was happening. I mean, here's this guy's coming in there like that. And it's an APA, which the boys were down in the hold of the ship. They had to come up and crawl down the sides on their, and here goes this guy right in there. I couldn't believe it.
They went right through the bow,
Yeah, but that was the way they went to their heaven. I mean, that was the way they die for their country. That's why they got the game kamikaze. Any other questions? Yes.
About later in the war.
Pardon me?
Later in the war, the Japanese decided the kamikazes and the bonsais were not treating them very effectively. They were losing too many good men.
Mm-hmm.
So they quit the bonsais and the kamikazes.
Any other questions?
When was that picture taken?
That was San Narcisos. We were getting, that was the area that we had to take before we'd end to Manila. And if you notice, here's all the natives there. The guerrillas had secured that section of ground, and those are all the Philippine guerrillas that secured that because they're there to greet us. That's amazing how, that's why the natives are up there. I mean, we were as surprised as anything else. But that was counted as an invasion force, so that was one of the 5.
Was that near Subic Bay?
Yes. Right. That's just before you came into the bay itself. That was one of those little areas that guarded the bay, I guess.
I got a picture of one of the assault boats that I went back 10 years ago, and one of the assault boats that we went in on was still there.
Is that right? Loaded down with a little sand, I imagine. As I said, I would appreciate, I don't want to lose that picture. Any other questions? I want you all to feel free and pop them. And it's been a great pleasure to be up here and share my experiences on my little part of the South Pacific. Phil? Any of you veterans here, if you want to be sure to go back and look it up in your VFW magazine, September of '94. That gives you a real lot of good information on the islands.
Bob mentioned his wife. If you'll indulge me, I'll mention my wife, Shirley. She's my first wife.
Comedian always.
And today, is her 49th wedding anniversary. a wonderful marriage, Shirley. That's it, folks. Good night.
Very nice.